Ethan Navarro had spent the afternoon driving across town, the streets glittering with frost beneath the winter Sunday. Spokane in December always carried a strange duality. The world looked festive, with glowing lights strung across rooftops, but the bite in the air made every breath sharp enough to sting the lungs. Ethan hummed softly to himself as he pulled his old truck into the wide, fresh layer of snow that had been carefully shoveled earlier that morning, no doubt by a hired service. He noticed, as he always did, how grand the house looked compared to his own aging home. Brick walls polished with precision shutters, painted in immaculate navy, a 12-foot Christmas tree visible through the bay window. He had contributed to all of it, though no one passing by would hope Ethan stepped out of the truck. In his mind, he had already pictured the evening. He would sit with Daniel in the living room, share a drink, and suggest hosting Christmas dinner at his place this year. It had been years since laughter had filled his home, and he longed for the warmth of family to return, even if only for a single night. He imagined cooking Elena's old recipes, especially the sage turkey. Almost brought a smile to his face. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and expensive vanilla candles. Clara, Daniel's wife, loved to surround herself with little luxuries. Ethan removed his coat carefully, not wanting to disturb the pristine furniture that seemed too perfect to sit on. Daniel gestured for him to relax on the leather couch, the very one Ethan remembered helping his son, smoothing a hand over the cushions as though confirming that his sacrifices were stitched into every seam. "You know Daniel, Ethan," began, his tone light and casual. "I was thinking I could make my famous turkey this year, the one your mother loved so much. It has been too long since we all sat together in one place like a real family." His voice softened as memories of Elena. See her bustling in the kitchen, always making sure everyone was fed before herself. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his wedding ring catching the glow of the fireplace. His posture stiffened, his shoulders curving inward as though bracing for something unpleasant. Ethan noticed the change immediately. He had spent a lifetime reading people, building trust, running a business with little more than grit and instinct. Daniel started the words hesitant. "Unfortunately, you will not be welcome here for Christmas." For a moment, Ethan thought he had misheard. The world seemed to tilt slightly. The warmth of the room became oppressive, the smell of vanilla cloying. He blinked, staring at his son as though he were a stranger. "What do you mean?" His voice came out steady, but his hands had... In my own son's home, Daniel avoided his father's gaze, staring instead at the marble coffee table between them, the same table Ethan had helped purchase when Clara declared that their old one was outdated. His words came in fragments, each one smaller than the last. "Clara's parents are coming this year. They would prefer if you were not here. It is just easier this way. You know how they are about traditions." Ethan let the words sink in. The phrases cut deeper than any insult. He glanced around the living room, the silk curtains chosen by Clara, the hardwood floors installed with money from Ethan's second mortgage, the crown molding purchased when his credit card was nearly maxed. Every inch of this house carried the fingerprints of his sacrifice, and yet he was the one treated as an outsider. "And what way is that?" Ethan asked slowly. His son flinched as if the question itself were an accusation. "Do not make this harder than it has to be." From the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed the gleam of the new KitchenAid mixer on the counter, the professional model Clara had insisted she needed for her holiday baking phase. $2,000 of his money, for an appliance that had likely been used only twice. "Where will I spend Christmas then?" The question slipped out, quieter than he intended, almost pleading. "Maybe you could visit Daniel's Aunt Rosa." Face crumbled, his voice. "Or we could do something the weekend after, as though Christmas were just another appointment that could be rescheduled for convenience." The final blow landed quiet and devastating. Ethan rose slowly, his knees aching under the weight of years spent carrying burdens alone. He walked past the family photographs lining the hallway, each frame showing his face shrinking more distant, overflowing with Clara's expensive jacket, symbols of her insatiable appetite for more. His hand gripped the cold doorknob. "Son," he said without turning back, his voice calm but firm, "tell Clara's parents something for me. Feliz Navidad." The December air slapped his face as he stepped outside. Behind him he heard Daniel call his name once, then the soft click of the door closing. In the glow of the Christmas lights, looking at the house he had poured his savings into, the house he had built, not with bricks but with love and sacrifice. A house where he no longer belonged. Inside his truck, Ethan sat motionless for a moment, watching the windows twinkle with warmth he was not invited to share. His phone buzzed in his pocket, likely Daniel, calling to offer hollow apologies, and the engine roared to life, a growl that mirrored his mood. He drove into the darkness, the heater humming against the biting cold. As he navigated the familiar streets, old memories stirred like ghosts. He passed the bank where he had refinanced his home to cover their down payment, the office where he had signed the second mortgage to rescue them after Daniel lost his job. Each landmark was a reminder of the years he had bled himself dry. Ethan watched a young father loading Christmas presents into his car. The children pressed their faces against the frosted window breath, fogging the glass with excitement. Once upon a time that had been Daniel and him simple moments of joy before Clara and her family rewrote the rules. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. By the time he pulled into his driveway, his mind was no longer filled with a clarity he had not felt in years. His house was smaller, the porch light flickering, the concrete cracked. But it was his. No one could take that away from him. He stepped inside the emptiness, pressing in the silence heavy without Elena's laughter. Yet there was something else now, a spark deep in his chest. The pain of rejection had awakened something long dormant. As he hung his coat and sat in the quiet, being excluded from a single Christmas dinner, this was about reclaiming dignity stolen over years of silent sacrifice. Ethan Navarro was not finished. In fact, he was just beginning. Ethan sat in his living room that night, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the worn walls. The house felt smaller than ever, hollow and cold, his eyes without the mantle where a photograph of Elena smiled back at him, forever frozen in a time when family meant everything. For years, that picture had been his anchor. Tonight, it became a reminder of everything he had lost. The rejection replayed in his mind again and again. Daniel's voice hesitant yet final. Clara's invisible hand pulling the strings. The words burned like acid. Cut him out of his own bloodline. You will reduced him to nothing more than an inconvenience. And yet the irony twisted deeper. He had built their comfort, sacrificed his future, and now he was exiled from the very life he had paid for. The weight of it all pressed against his chest. He stood and moved to the small desk in the corner, pulling out a manila folder that had sat unopened for too long. Inside, his past 5 years stared back at him in neat, merciless rows. Receipts for appliances, furniture, renovations, vacations. Each page carried evidence of his sacrifice, a paper trail of quiet desperation. He laid them out across the table. The numbers blurred together like a tide threatening to drown him. $2,800, month after month, disappearing into Daniel and Clara's perfect suburban dream. $70,000 gone in just over 2 years. By the 5th year, more than he and Elena had planned the college fund they had started for grandchildren. He might never hold the life insurance that had vanished into someone else's house. All of it drained away, and for what Ethan pressed his palms flat against the table, steadying himself. He remembered the conversations that had led to each sacrifice. Daniel's worried voice asking for temporary help. Clara's sympathetic nods would get better soon. But they never did. Instead, every request became an expectation, every expectation became a demand, and every demand became another chain tightening around his life. The room felt colder as he traced the figures with his finger. He remembered shopping at discount stores, eating peanut butter sandwiches, patching his shoes instead of buying new ones. He had given up everything, piece by piece, while Daniel and Clara, the curtains billowed, the kitchen sparkled, all because he had starved his own needs. His chest ached with the memory of Elena. She would never have allowed this. She had been practical, wise, and firm in her love. She would have told him to stop years ago. But when she died, Ethan had clung to the only thing left, his son. Helping Daniel felt like keeping her was like holding on to her memory, a way to convince himself that family was still worth saving. Now he saw the truth. He had not been preserving family, he had been feeding a parasite. The anger that stirred inside him was different from the quiet bitterness he had carried for years. This was sharper, cleaner. It was not the sorrow of a man resigned to being used. It was the fire of someone who tonight it was bitter enough to wake him from the longest sleep of his life. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the evidence scattered before him. Every number was a reminder of his weakness, every page a testament to their arrogance. He thought of Daniel sitting across from him earlier, unable to meet his gaze, repeating Clara's excuses, her polished voice dripping with superiority, explaining why her family's traditions mattered more than his presence. They had not just betrayed him, they had erased him. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, rattling them in their frames. Ethan rose and pulled the curtains aside. Across the street, Christmas lights blinked on houses filled with laughter, families gathering, joy drifting through the cold. He remembered when his house had sounded the same. Elena's laughter, Daniel's excited voice as a boy unwrapping presents. The clatter of dishes as everyone crowded into the kitchen. Those memories cut deeper now, twisted by the knowledge that they had been replaced with something hollow and cruel. Ethan returned to the mantel, picking up Elena's photograph, as though she were still guiding him. He whispered into the silence, "I am sorry, Elena. I let them use me. I let them disrespect your memory, but not anymore." His voice cracked, but the words carried a weight he had not felt in years. Setting the photo back carefully, Ethan returned to the desk. He began stacking the papers into neat piles. Mortgage statements here, receipts there, clearly to understand the full scope of what had been stolen from him. As the piles grew, so did his resolve. It was not only about money anymore, it was about dignity, about justice. Clara and her family had mistaken his generosity for weakness. They had mistaken his silence for ignorance. They had mistaken his love for Daniel as permission to treat him like a servant. They were wrong. By midnight, the evidence was organized, a battlefield in his bones, but his mind sharper than it had been in years. He had been humiliated, cast aside, treated as though he were nothing. But that very humiliation had stripped away the last illusion. He finally saw them for what they were, and now they would see him too. The clock ticked into the early hours of the morning, each second pulling him further away from the man who once believed no longer willing to beg for acceptance. He would not plead to be included in traditions built on lies. He had given them everything, and they had given him nothing but shame. He rose from the table and walked slowly to the window. Outside the street was silent, the snow gleaming under the pale moonlight. It looked peaceful, but inside Ethan's chest a storm had begun. The weight of betrayal was heavy, but it also carried something else. Empty room, as if Elena were still listening. "This is not the end. This is the beginning." The words hung in the air, sharp and certain. Ethan turned away from the window, his mind already moving toward what had to come next. The betrayal had wounded him, but it had also awakened him, and now he was ready to act. The morning after his long night at the desk drifted lazily from the sky, settling over the cracked driveway as Ethan stirred his coffee. The taste of freedom lingered stronger than the bitterness of the roast. He had finally admitted to himself the truth. He was not simply betrayed. He had been used. And now the time for silence was over. The phone rang, slicing through the quiet kitchen. The screen lit up with a name he had come to despise. Clara. For a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail. He wanted to hear her voice, wanted to measure her arrogance now that he was no longer willing to bow beneath it. He waited until the fourth ring, just long enough for her to wonder, then answered. "Dennis," she said sweetly, her tone wrapped in false concern. "I heard about the misunderstanding with Daniel. I think things got a little confused last night." "Misunderstanding," Ethan repeated slowly, was very clear. Clara sighed, the sound carefully measured to convey patience. "Look, you have to understand my parents' perspective. They value tradition. They expect a certain atmosphere during the holidays. It is nothing personal." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. And what atmosphere would that be? A pause followed. He could hear rustling in the background, shopping bags. Perhaps the sound thinner this time, but still coated with superiority. "They are not used to your kind of cooking. The spicy food, the loud music. They prefer something more refined. And Dennis, they are educated people. They enjoy conversations about art, literature, current events. You know, things like that." The words struck like blows. His kind of cooking. His silence deepened as the memory of countless Sunday praising Elena's tamales. Clara laughing over homemade salsa, calling it better than anything at the restaurants she loved to brag about. Now those same meals were considered unworthy. "My kind of cooking," Ethan said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You mean the food you ate every week when money was tight? The food you said reminded you of your grandmother?" "That was different," Clara replied quickly. "With my parents here, we cannot afford to, well, embarrass ourselves. They move in different circles. You must understand." The quiet inside Ethan's kitchen sharpened. He did not raise his voice, but his words cut deeper for their control. "So what you are telling me is that my presence would humiliate you, that I do not belong at your table, that your parents' approval matters more than the man who paid for the roof." She snapped, her sweetness cracking at last. "This is about class. My father graduated with honors. My mother speaks 4 languages. They summer in the Hamptons. What would you bring to the table? Stories about laying tile?" Ethan's breath caught, not with pain, but with fury held on a leash. "I built a business from nothing," he said, his voice steady. I employed 50 men. I paid more in
And still
taxes
you
than your
speak of
father
me as
earned,
though
though
I
I am
am
beneath
beneath
you. Money is not everything, Clara sneered. Breeding matters. Education matters. Elena understood her place better than you do. She knew when to stay quiet. The name hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Ethan's knuckles whitened around the phone. What did you say about my wife? I am only saying she blended in. Clara continued, oblivious were not meant for her. She did not make waves, unlike you. The silence that followed was more dangerous than any raised voice. When Ethan finally spoke, his tone was low, deliberate, chilling. Maria had more class in her little finger than your entire bloodline will ever possess. Oh, please, Clara scoffed. She was a house cleaner who got lucky. At least she stayed quiet about it. Something inside Ethan snapped, not in rage, but he saw Clara for exactly what she was, entitled, arrogant, cruel, and utterly unworthy of his sacrifice. Clara, he said, his voice like iron, this conversation is over. We are done pretending to be family. You cannot just. We are done, he repeated and ended the call. The phone slipped from his hand onto the counter. For a long moment he stood still, his chest heaving not from weakness, though a heavy curtain had been pulled back. He looked around the small kitchen with its outdated appliances and flickering light, and for the first time in years it did not feel like a prison. It felt like his. He walked to the desk again and pulled out the folder, spreading the documents once more. Only now they no longer mocked him. They armed him. Mortgage payments, of his generosity, transfers, of his naivety, of his enslavement to their greed. He would no longer be the victim. The decision formed as naturally as breathing. Enough was enough. He reached for the phone again, not to call Clara or Daniel, but to call the bank. His voice was steady when he gave the account number, when he confirmed the monthly transfers, when he instructed the agent it was done. Ethan felt something he had not felt in years. Relief. He sat back, his hands steady, his heart calm. For the first time he was free. No more payments, no more excuses, no more buying a place in a family that had already shut its doors. Yet even as he savored the moment, a shadow lingered. Clara would not take this lightly. Daniel, with their pride and connections, would not forgive being defied. Ethan glanced at Elena's photo on the mantel. Her smile seemed to hold approval, encouragement, even warning. He raised his glass of whiskey in a silent toast. To you, Elena, to dignity, to justice. The fire in his chest burned steady and strong. He knew the storm had only begun. The call to the bank had been short, almost too simple for the magnitude of what a polite voice confirming the cancellation, and just like that, 5 years of sacrifice were severed with the push of a button. Ethan set the phone down carefully, almost reverently, as though he had just performed a ritual. Silence filled the kitchen. But it was not the hollow, suffocating silence he had grown used to. This was different. It was clean, almost liberating. He glanced around at the cracked tiles and worn cabinets that had embarrassed survival. Every scratch, every flaw had been paid for with his own money, his own labor. Unlike the palace, Clara strutted through this house belonged to him entirely. The manila folder still lay open on the table, papers scattered like evidence at a trial. He looked at the highlighted numbers again, the long parade of transfers, and a bitter laugh on scraps, so Daniel and Clara could post pictures of their new furniture, their dinner parties, their vacations. His generosity had been their disguise, a mask of prosperity worn at his expense. But the mask was about to crack. Ethan gathered the papers into one neat stack and slid them back into the folder. He carried it to the fireplace, struck a match, and held it steady. The flame flickered hungrily as he lowered it to the edge, watching the paper curl and blacken. Then he dropped it into the fire. One by one he fed the flames. Statements, receipts, transfers, years of servitude turning to ash. The fire hissed and popped sparks, leaping up the chimney like fragments of his old self breaking free. Heat washed over his face, warm and cleansing. By the time the last paper vanished, his chest felt lighter. He had burned not just evidence, but the good bottle he had been saving for some future celebration that never came. Tonight was reason enough. He sat back in his armchair, glass in hand, and looked at Elena's picture on the mantel. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to smile. "Merry Christmas to me," he whispered. The phone buzzed on the counter. Clara's name flashed across the screen, again and again, followed like an angry hornet battering against glass. Ethan let it ring. Their voices no longer had power over him. He took another sip of whiskey, savoring the taste of defiance. Morning arrived, bright and sharp sunlight spilling across his kitchen table. For the first time in years, Ethan brewed coffee without calculating how much he needed to save to a Colombian blend he had been denying himself, its rich aroma filling the room. Freedom had a flavor, and it was better than anything he had tasted in a long time. At precisely 10:47, the phone rang again. Clara. Her persistence was predictable. Ethan answered this time not out of obligation but curiosity. "Dennis," she said briskly, her sweetness replaced with irritation, "I need you to pick up my parents from the airport. Alaska Air Carousel 3. Please be punctual." Ethan nearly laughed aloud. Less than a day after declaring him unfit for Christmas dinner, she expected him to chauffeur her parents as though nothing had changed. Her audacity was breathtaking. "And you are asking me because," Ethan said quietly. "Because that is what family does," Clara snapped. "They help each other. You are the only one with time, and frankly, you are not my rival. So just get in your truck and do it." The words slid like ice into Ethan's chest, but they did not freeze him. They ignited him. "What shirt should I wear?" he asked softly. "The blue one you wore to Daniel's graduation," Clara said without hesitation. "They notice those things. Do not embarrass us." She hung up without so much as a thank you. Ethan set the phone down, staring at the clock on the wall. 10:52, hours until the flight. At 2:15, Ethan was not at the airport. He was in his armchair with a cup of Earl Grey and the Sunday edition of the newspaper. He worked the crossword puzzle smiling as he filled in the final clue. Delayed gratification. The answer was postponement. He chuckled at the irony. By 3:30, his phone had rung half a dozen times. Clara's name appeared again and again, followed by an unknown number he suspected belonged to her parents. By 4:15, the buzzing was constant, a furious wasp trying to force its way into his peace. Ethan walked calmly to the wall and unplugged the landline. Then he powered his cell phone off. Silence. Perfect intentional silence. He made himself a grilled cheese sandwich and heated tomato soup, comfort food he had avoided for years, because every grocery dollar had been stretched thin by their demands. The cheese melted golden, the savoring every bite while imagining Clara's parents stranded in the airport, luggage piled around them, wondering why their servant had not arrived. The thought made the meal taste even better. By 5 o'clock, Ethan was debating which movie to watch when pounding erupted at his front door. Not knocking. Pounding. Angry, violent, demanding. He set his tea down and walked slowly to the door, all three figures huddled on his porch, faces twisted with fury. He opened the door to find Victor Ward inches from his face, red with rage. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he barked, pushing past Ethan into the living room without waiting for permission. Behind him, Helena swept in her hair, disheveled lips pursed with disdain. "This is barbaric," she hissed, "leaving us stranded like common beggars." Her makeup smudged her coat, wrinkled her voice, trembling with rage. "You humiliated us. My parents had to take a taxi because you decided to play games. Do you realize what you have done?" Ethan closed the door gently, the click of the lock, soft but final. When he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, sharper than any shout. "Get out of my house." They froze, stunned. Victor's face darkened to purple. "Not after what you do not get to make demands. This is my house," Ethan said evenly. "And I want you out." Helena stepped forward, her tone dripping with condescension. "Do you know who we are? My husband has connections across this city. Business, politics, society. You cannot treat us this way without consequences." This Ethan interrupted his gaze. Steady was a lesson. About arrogance, about respect. "And it is over. Leave." Victor jabbed a finger toward his chest. "You will regret Ethan this." Opened the door wide and gestured to the night outside. "Out." They filed past him, sputtering threats and indignation, but their fury no longer touched him. He shut the door firmly behind them and turned the deadbolt. Through the window, he watched them climb into their rental car, still arguing as they drove away. The house felt cleaner with their absence, but their words lingered. Public consequences. He sat back down in his armchair, lifting his tea once more. A flicker of concern passed through him, but it was drowned out by something stronger. Anticipation. 3 days passed before Ethan understood the scale of what he had provoked. He had expected anger, maybe more pounding at his door, perhaps a bitter phone call or two. But he had not expected the quiet precision with which Clara's kitchen table, with a steaming mug of coffee sunlight streaming through frosted windows, when his eyes fell on the headline of the Spokane Review. His hand froze around the mug. His own face stared back at him from page 3. The headline screamed, "Spokane businessman abandons elderly couple at airport during holiday storm." Ethan's stomach turned cold. He read the article once quickly, described as visiting parents of a respected community member were quoted at length. According to them, Ethan had cruelly left them stranded in dangerous weather for over 4 hours. They claimed he ignored repeated calls, forcing them to pay an expensive taxi fare in frigid conditions. Words like erratic behavior and mental instability were sprinkled through the piece, painting him as a bitter, unstable old man who had suddenly snapped 52 degrees and sunny. There had been no storm, no danger, yet the article presented their tale as fact, complete with a photo of the wards looking weary but dignified, their luggage beside them. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a carefully planted seed meant to grow into a thorn bush around his name. Ethan set the paper down slowly, fury rising in his chest. He had lived in Spokane his whole life. Reputation here was currency could erase decades of work friendships and respect. Cody and Helena knew that. This was not petty anger anymore. This was war. For the first time, Ethan felt something unusual. Not despair, not anger, but a grudging respect. His enemies were cunning. They were not just spoiled parasites lashing out. They were calculated players using connections and influence to destroy him publicly. But if they thought that business from nothing, he knew strategy, he knew patience, and he knew that arrogance often left blind spots. Ethan folded the newspaper, neatly placed it on the table, and opened his laptop. If they wanted to play chess, he would show them what a real strategist looked like. He began with Cody. A quick search revealed years of professional First National Bank, later treasurer of the Inland Northwest Business Leaders Association. A man who had spent decades cultivating trust, sitting on boards, appearing at charity functions. He projected the image of respectability, which meant he had much to lose if that image cracked. Helena's profile was no different. Her social media painted a carefully curated life. Wine tastings, charity luncheons, vacation with phrases like blessed life and gratitude, comments from friends praising her elegance. Every post was designed to radiate success. Ethan knew that kind of perfection was often fragile. Then came Clara. Her online presence was even more revealing. Posts about their beautiful home check-ins at expensive restaurants, photos of jewelry and clothes, all during months when Ethan had been last week read, "So excited to host Christmas dinner with family. Cannot wait to show off our home." The arrogance of it made Ethan laugh aloud, though there was no humor in the sound. But the final discovery cut the deepest. Daniel's professional profile showed a recent new connection. Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor of the Spokane Review. The same Patricia who had written the hit piece about Ethan. Her parents had used Daniel's silence, his loyalty to them, to funnel their lies into the paper. Ethan sat back in his chair, staring at the evidence spread across his screen. They had made 3 mistakes. First, they had underestimated him. Second, they had gone public, which gave him the right to respond in kind. Third, they had left a trail of arrogance online, documenting every ounce of their hypocrisy for the world to see. He began to work and organized. Receipts for down payments, furniture renovations, and mortgage transfers printed and sorted by year. Photos downloaded from Clara's social media showing off items he had paid for. Even screenshots of her posts boasting about hosting family dinners in the house that had drained his life savings. By evening, his desk was covered in neatly ordered stacks. More than 5 years of financial transferred bled from his retirement, and Elena's life insurance poured into the lives of people who now called him unstable and dangerous. He felt no shame in the numbers, only resolve. He imagined their faces when the truth came out. The same social circles they courted would see exactly who they were. Cody, the respected banker, exposed as a liar who smeared the man, revealed as a parasite living on the back of someone she despised. Clara, the perfect wife, unveiled as a manipulative fraud. Even Daniel would not escape, though Ethan's heart still ached at the thought of his son. He leaned back, eyes drifting to the wall calendar. December 18th, 7 days until Christmas. 7 days until the perfect moment. Clara had already announced a grand dinner online, inviting family, the very people whose opinion mattered most to them. Perfect. He would not scream or shout or beg. He would not fight them in the shadows. He would walk into their house, into their world, and show the truth to everyone they sought to impress. Ethan closed the laptop and exhaled slowly. The battle had been declared, but the war was only beginning. That night, as he prepared for bed, the phone buzzed again.
Likely Clara
A
or
number
her
he did
parents
not recognize. New
this
angles of
time.
pressure. He ignored it and slipped under the covers. The house was quiet, the winter air biting through the cracks, but his heart felt steady. For years, he had been the man who gave, and gave hoping love would return. Now he was something else. He was the man who would take back his dignity. The Wards had chosen to fight in public. Very
Christmas
well.
Eve arrived with
Public
skies
was
where
the
they would
color of
fall.
steel, and a cold wind that rattled the bare branches outside Ethan's window. He rose early, moving with the calm precision of a man preparing for something far larger than himself. The evidence he had spent days gathering lay neatly stacked on his desk, each packet identical, each piece of paper carefully ordered. Bank statements, mortgage records, receipts,
Even the newspaper article
photos
that had
pulled
painted
from
him
social
as a
media.
villain
Annotated in red ink with the word lies scrawled beside every distortion. He made 12 copies, one for each guest. Clara and Daniel had invited to their holiday dinner. He slipped the packets into manila folders, stacked them in his briefcase, and set it by the door. It was not anger that guided his movements now. It was something colder, steadier. He had carried humiliation for years.
He dressed with
Tonight
care,
he would return it, a
multiplied.
navy suit pressed and spotless, the one he had worn to Elena's funeral. Black shoes polished until they caught the light. A dark tie knotted tight at his throat. He looked in the mirror and for a moment barely recognized himself. The weary, broken man of last week was gone. In his place stood someone leaner, sharper, harder.
The streets
At
of Spokane
6:30,
shimmered
he drove
with
Christmas
across
lights,
town.
houses glowing with warmth, families gathering around tables laden with food. As his truck rolled into Kendall Yards, he spotted Clara and Daniel's house from half a block away. Cars lined the street. Golden light spilled from the windows, laughter drifting faintly into the night. It looked like the picture of joy, but Ethan knew better. He parked across the street,
Late
checked
enough
his
for
watch,
everyone
and
to be
waited
seated.
until
6:45.
early enough that no one would escape before he was finished. He picked up the briefcase and crossed the icy pavement, each step steady, deliberate. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Clara liked to boast about how safe her neighborhood was, how they had no need for locks. Ethan pushed the door open and stepped into a wave of warmth. The scent of
Voices
roasted
floated from the
turkey
dining
and
room,
cinnamon, loud
filled
and
the
cheerful. He followed the sound. The scene before him might have been pulled from a holiday card. A long table gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier. 12 guests sat with plates piled high, wine glasses, half-full faces flushed with good cheer. Clara stood at the head of the table, raising her glass in a toast. Daniel
Cody
sat
and
beside her,
Helena
stiff
Ward
and
glowed
pale,
with
his
smile.
satisfaction, their laughter ringing loudest. The moment Ethan entered, silence fell like a blade. 12 heads turned. Forks froze midair. Clara's glass trembled in her hand. "Good evening," Ethan said calmly, setting his briefcase on the marble sideboard. "I hope you do not mind me joining your celebration." Dennis. Clara stammered, her face draining of color. "This is completely
Actually,
inappropriate,"
Ethan
replied, opening
You
the
need to
briefcase.
leave right now.
"I think your guests deserve to know who really paid for this dinner, for this house, for the life you are so proud to display." Gasps rippled around the table. One woman leaned forward, curiosity in her eyes. "What is he talking about?" Clara forced a laugh, high and brittle. "He is having some sort of episode." Daniel called
Circled the
someone,
table slowly,
but
placing
Ethan
a
was
packet
packet
of
of documents in front of each guest. His voice remained calm, almost conversational. "Here are 5 years of mortgage payments. Receipts for renovations, furniture, appliances. Over $200,000 of my money poured into this home." The guests opened the folders hesitantly. Papers rustled. Eyes widened. Conversations stuttered into uneasy silence. A man in a gray sweater
woman in
frowned
pearls
deeply, whispered
at the
outrageous
highlighted
under her
numbers.
breath. Dennis volunteered. Clara blurted, her perfect composure crumbling. "We never asked for this." "Actually," Ethan said, pulling out copies of the newspaper article, "let us talk about what you did ask for, and what you told the press about me." He placed the articles on the table one by one, his red notes glaring from the margins. Guests recognized his
Cody
photo
here,
from the
Ethan
paper,
continued,
murmurs,
spreading
nodding
like
toward
fire.
Clara's father, used his connections to plant this story, portraying me as unstable, as dangerous, as a man who abandoned helpless people in freezing weather. "Cody," one of the men at the table said sharply, "is this true?" Cody shifted in his chair, his face darkening. "This man is delusional. He has serious problems. Do not believe a word he says." The weather was 52 degrees,
They were not
and
stranded
sunny.
tourists.
Ethan countered even. "They were your host's parents, whom I had been told to chauffeur like a servant less than a day after being banned from this very dinner." Helena's voice cracked with fury. You have no idea who you are speaking to. My husband has influence. You will regret this, not as much as you will regret underestimating me, Ethan said, his voice cutting like glass. He turned to the guests. For years I funded so they could play at wealth. And when I finally said no, they tried to destroy me in the newspaper. That is who you are breaking bread with tonight. The silence that followed was devastating. Guests looked from Ethan to Clara to Cody, their expressions shifting from disbelief to disgust. One elderly woman pushed her plate away. The woman in pearls said sharply, Did you really tell this man he was not good enough to join your dinner table because of his background? Clara opened her mouth, but no words came. Her mask of elegance had shattered, leaving only panic. This man supported your family for 5 years, another guest said, holding up a bank statement. And you repaid him with insults and lies. It is unconscionable.
Dad, I did
Daniel
not know
finally
about the
spoke, his
article.
voice barely audible. Your wife knew, Ethan replied coldly, and her parents orchestrated it. They turned me into a villain for refusing to remain their personal bank account. The air grew heavy with shame. 12 people sat in judgment now, their eyes no longer admiring their hosts but condemning them. Clara's lips trembled. Cody's jaw tightened. Helena stared at the tablecloth, straightened his tie, and looked around the table one final time. I wanted you all to know the truth before you hear my name again in this paper. Next time, you will hear the real story. He walked toward the door. Behind him, voices erupted. Guests demanding explanations, questions firing like bullets, the sound of a carefully crafted facade collapsing into chaos. The noise followed him out into the cold air, inhaling deeply. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest was gone. The war was not over, but the first battle had been won. The chaos of that Christmas Eve dinner rippled through Spokane faster than Ethan had imagined. For a city that prided itself on quiet respectability, gossip traveled like wildfire, and within days the ward's perfect image had begun to unravel. At first, Ethan did not look for news. He simply enjoyed the silent bills that were not his responsibility. He fixed the flickering porch light that had annoyed him for years. He even bought himself a new chair with money that for the first time in half a decade belonged only to him. Each small act felt like a declaration of freedom, but whispers found their way to him regardless. A neighbor mentioned that Helena had been uncharacteristically absent. Cody's name had disappeared from a committee list, where it had always stood proudly. The ward's humiliation at Christmas had not been contained within those 12 guests. It had spread outward, carried by curiosity and judgment, until their reputation was as tattered as old cloth. By March, the fallout reached Daniel and Clara in the most brutal way possible. A letter arrived at Ethan's door by mistake, the envelope thick and stamped before realizing it was addressed to his son. Inside, a notice of default spelled out what Ethan had already suspected. 3 months of unpaid mortgage had caught up with them. $8,400 overdue. 14 days to pay or face foreclosure. He held the letter in his hands for a long moment, then set it aside. It was no longer his problem. He had spent too many years saving them from the consequences of their choices. The calls began soon after, Clara's number flashing across his phone at all hours. Cody and Helena trying from blocked numbers, their voices growing more frantic with each voicemail. He deleted them all without listening. He would not let their poison back into his home. Even Daniel's calls longed to pick up, to hear his son's voice, to believe that something of the boy he had raised was still inside the man who had betrayed him. But the wounds were too raw. Forgiveness had bloomed in his heart that night at the dinner table, but trust was a different thing. Trust could not be given. It had to be earned. It took 97 days for Daniel Thursday evening to find his son standing there. Shoulders slumped. Eyes shadowed his expensive suit, wrinkled as though he had slept in it. The smell of desperation clung to him like smoke. Dad, Daniel said softly. We need to talk. Ethan stepped aside without a word. Daniel entered hesitantly, his gaze moving around the house as though seeing it for the first time. The new recliner. The fresh paint on the walls. The repaired porch light glowing steady. It is what happens when you spend money on yourself, Ethan replied, his tone even. Coffee. Daniel shook his head and sat gingerly on the couch. For a moment silence stretched between them. Then the words began to spill. I am sorry, Dad, for everything, for Christmas, for the newspaper, for how we treated you. I did not know Cody planted that story. I swear I did not. When I found out, I felt sick.
I should have stood
I
up
should
for
have
them.
defended you years ago. Ethan studied his son carefully, noting the slump in his posture, the cracks in his voice. This was not the confident man who had once excluded his father from Christmas dinner. This was someone broken, someone finally forced to face the consequences of his choices. And what did they say about your mother? Ethan asked quietly. Daniel's face tightened. He looked down at his hands. That she knew her place better than embarrass them. He shook his head, voice breaking. I should have left right then. I should never have let them talk about her that way. I should have defended both of you. Yes, Ethan said simply. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. The house is in foreclosure. We cannot make the payments without... His voice faltered. Without your help. Without my help, Ethan repeated. The money I sent every month while your wife's family
for 5
years,
garbage.
Daniel nodded miserably. Clara calculated it after Christmas. Over 200,000. 237,468, Ethan corrected. I know the exact amount because I finally added it up. Every penny gone, money I could have used to travel, to fix my house, to save for retirement. All of it vanished into your fantasy life. Daniel's face crumpled.
Ethan
I
said.
do not
The
know
money
how to
is
fix
gone.
this. But worse than that, the years are gone. 5 years when I could have been living my life instead of buying a place in yours. 5 years when I thought sacrifice would buy love. Maybe we could start over, Daniel said quickly. Maybe there is still time. Are you asking me to resume the payments? The hope in Daniel's eyes died. We are going to lose everything. The house.
I do not
Clara's
know what else
respect.
to do. Her parents
You will figure it
approval.
out, Ethan said not unkindly. The same way I figured out how to live without a son who respected me. The same way I learned to spend Christmas alone while you sat with people who thought I was beneath them. Daniel began to cry quietly, shoulders shaking. I lost you, did I not? I chose them over you, and now I have lost you forever. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. You did not lose me, Daniel. Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand. Is there any chance you could forgive me? I forgave you months ago, Ethan said, and meant it. But forgiveness does not mean going back. It means you start over from scratch. You show me respect instead of demanding I earn it. You make choices that are right, not convenient. And when someone tries to exclude me from family again, you remember who actually understanding at last. What about the house? He asked quietly. It is not my problem anymore, Ethan replied. You are a grown man. Figure it out. Sell it. Buy something you can afford. Get a job that pays enough. Stop expecting other people to subsidize your mistakes. Daniel stood his shoulders straighter than when he had arrived. He looked at his father with something like pride, seeing you stand up for yourself that night. I was proud of you. Embarrassed and angry, but proud too. Good, Ethan said. Maybe there is hope for you yet. When the door closed behind his son, Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey and stepped out onto the porch. Spring air carried the smell of new grass, the promise of renewal. He lifted the glass to the fading sky. For years he had wasted himself buying tickets to their theater. He had found something better. Real family. Rose's message buzzed on his phone, inviting him to Sunday dinner. Children eager to show him their projects. Laughter waiting for him. A place where he was wanted. He smiled, typed his reply, and raised his glass. The future no longer felt like a burden. It felt like freedom. The weeks after Daniel's visit passed with a calmness Ethan had not felt snow, melting into streams that rushed down the gutters, carrying away the remnants of a harsh season. His house felt alive again. He repaired the creaking steps on the porch, repainted the kitchen walls, and even planted seeds in the backyard where Elena had once dreamed of growing tomatoes. Each small act of care felt like stitching new life into old fabric. The house no longer represented struggle. Was a reminder that he had taken back his life inch by inch. On Sundays he drove to Rosa's home, where the smell of home-cooked meals filled the air and the voices of nieces and nephews echoed with warmth. They welcomed him with joy, not obligation. At the table he felt something he had forgotten long ago. Belonging. No one asked him for money. No one calculated his worth in dollars. They asked only for stories, for laughter, and here it was given freely. But even in that peace, shadows lingered. Clara and her parents had not disappeared. Their social circle, once a fortress of prestige, had crumbled, but they remained bitter and restless. Rumors drifted to Ethan through neighbors and coworkers. Cody had been asked to resign quietly from 2 boards. Helena's name no longer appeared. She had once thrived on, rarely showed her face in public. Daniel, though still tied to her, seemed changed. Once a man living for the approval of others, he now called his father weekly, sometimes stopping by to help with small repairs or to share a meal. Their relationship remained fragile, but it was mending, built not on money but on quiet conversations. As Ethan sat on the porch with a book, his phone buzzed with a message from Rosa. Dinner on Sunday. Bring your appetite. The children want to show you their school projects. He smiled at the words, his chest warming with gratitude. He looked out at the garden. Green shoots pushed bravely through the soil, reaching for sunlight. The sight filled him with a quiet pride. He had planted those seeds with his own hands, itself, and now they promised when given the chance. For years he had believed that family was something you bought with sacrifice, that love was something earned through self-denial. Now he saw the truth. Real family was not purchased. It was chosen. It was built on respect, not entitlement. On the first warm Sunday of May, Ethan sat at Rosa's table, surrounded by cheerfully over who would sit next to him, their chatter spilling over into giggles. Rosa watched with a smile, her eyes soft. "You belong here," she whispered as she passed him a plate of roasted chicken. Ethan nodded, emotion catching in his throat. For the first time since Elena's death, he truly believed it. Later that evening, as he walked back to his truck under a sky painted in shades of pink and gold, he thought about everything, the rage, the burning of old papers, the silence after cutting the cord, the chaos of that Christmas Eve. All of it had led him to this moment of peace. When he arrived home, he poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood at the window looking out at the street where children rode bikes and neighbors watered lawns. He raised his glass softly toward Elena's picture on the mantel. "You were right all along," he murmured. "Family is not who demands. I should have remembered that sooner." The night settled quiet around him, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of contentment. The silence of a man who had walked through fire and come out whole. He had not just survived. He had reclaimed his life. This story is a reminder that sacrifice without respect becomes slavery, and love without loyalty that dignity must never be sold for the approval of others. Real family is not defined by blood, wealth, or appearances. It is defined by respect, loyalty, and love freely given. Sometimes the hardest lesson is learning to walk away from those who only take, and to choose instead the people who truly value you. In the end, freedom is found not in giving everything, but in knowing you're meaningful. Do not forget to like the video, share it with others who might need its message, and leave a comment with your thoughts. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of betrayal, resilience, and redemption.